Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. Got another Master Duel video for you, coming at you with another tier list. We're going to be talking about the current metagame in conjuncture with the ban list that is coming up on December 5th. Now, the date that I'm recording this is November 29th, and as of right now, there has not been a pack announcement officially for any new archetypes. So I'm not going to be factoring in any potential new archetypes. I'm aware there are rumors flying around. I don't mess with that because Konami bans people, or in some extreme cases even sends private investigators after people who really delve into that stuff. So I'm not going to get involved with that. We're just going to be talking about the upcoming ban list plus what is in the game right now. So let's not waste more time. Let's get right on into it with Crystron. I am going to put Crystron in tier 3 again. I know last time that there are some folks who are considering it more a tier 2 deck, and I think Crystron is really good and I really like it, but I have to be completely honest with myself. I don't think it's a tier 2 deck. I think it is a tier 3 deck. I think that it does lack a little bit, not just in terms of like weakness to hand traps, but also like in overall power level. Even if it does go off uninterrupted, Crystron boards are not as difficult to break as some other decks in this meta. But that said, Crystron is still an excellent deck. It's one that, in my experience, really rewards the pilot for skill. That's true of every deck to an extent, of course. But Crystron's one of those where like really good Crystron players will get a lot more mileage out of the deck. And there's a lot of different ways a lot of engines you can play it, a lot of different ways to play it. I like that. But I do think Crystron is a tier 3 deck. All right, I'm gonna say the same for pure Gem Knight. Now, this is going to be specifically the going second OTK version of Gem Knight. I'm also going to put that in tier 3. Fiendsmith Gem Knight we're going to talk about later down here, but pure just going second OTK Gem Knight is a tier 3 for me. I think that right now there's not any particular going second strategies I feel are like too oppressive or powerful or anything. And I don't think going second is particularly like any stronger in this format than it has been in the past. There are some formats like where Tenpai was a tier 1 deck, where going second, you can make an argument for it even as a non-Tenpai deck because there was enough Tenpai out there to make a going second build of a deck. In this format, to play a specific going second version of a deck, I don't think gives you that many benefits over going first. That said, Gem Knight is really, set up to OTK going second, so that's why I think it's still definitely a tier 3 deck for this build in particular. Branded, easy tier 2 deck. Branded lives in tier 2, except for when the new support comes out, and it'll probably be tier 1 at that point. But yeah, well, the Albaz in white, or whatever it's called, then the Synchro Monster. That's the specific new support I'm referring to. Anyway, for now, Branded is going to maintain its residence in tier 2. Maliss, okay, this one is going to be really interesting to try to evaluate. So, Maliss, I have actually done a bit of testing with post-banless Maliss. I made a guide for it that you're going to see later this week. Very extensive. It took me a very long time to record. But yeah, the Maliss post-ban list is not quite as washed as a lot of people think. I know I've seen, of course, this happens with every major ban list change, especially when a card gets banned for a deck. It's like, everyone's like, oh, this card's banned, deck is unplayable. That's the immediate first assumption, and it's almost never true. That was the assumption when Merly got banned, that was the initial assumption when Oak got banned, and I've seen people say it with Red Ransom as well. I have found quite a few combo lines. You could still make very impressive boards with Maliss off the same starters that you had before, but they are not quite as good of boards as they were, and they are much, much weaker to hand traps. And in that regard, I think for the time being, I'm going to put Maliss at the top of tier 3, because it's a lot like Crystron in the regards that like it's still putting up solid boards, but it's still really stopped very easily by a lot of hand traps. And the boards that it does make are definitely easier to push through than the boards that it was making in the past. Yeah, I think that Maliss, I don't think it's like completely unplayable. In fact, like I said, I'm going to leave it towards the top of tier 3 because although I think in the initial weeks after the ban list hits, you're not going to see like Maliss hardly at all. It's going to feel more like a rogue deck. I think that this is a little bit closer to where its actual power level lies, and probably where it will end up when things kind of balance out. But Yeah, I'm going to leave Maliss here for the time being at the top of tier 3. I'm going to put Yubel in tier 3 as well. I'm a little tempted to put it in Rogue, though, I'm not going to lie. Not even for the loss of Appaloosa or anything. Like, a lot of people said that Yubel got a lot weaker because Appaloosa got banned, but one, Appaloosa was actually a pretty optional card in Yubel, a lot more than a lot of people realize in the first place. And two, while I wouldn't argue that Appaloosa was carrying Yubel, I don't think that Yubel's weakness in the meta lies from the lack of it as a result. I think it's more just that Yubel overall is just not really putting up as strong of boards or playing through hand traps quite as much. It's the same argument you'll see for a lot of like, it's a lot of the difference for me between tier 3 and Rogue as opposed to tier 1 and tier 2, right? These builds are often either layered or just outright dense enough that it's really hard to push through them even with like a full combo in your hand. And that they can also naturally play through at least one hand trap, if not a couple. Whereas these decks down here kind of don't have all those strengths, but are still really good in the format. I'm going to leave Yubel at the top of Rogue for now. I might change my mind on that. Okay, so next up we have Fiendsmith Orcust, and that is definitely going to be a tier 1 deck for me. I might actually have this being my top deck of the meta right now because, and it's funny, this is actually the next deck up here. I might have said, you know, even a few weeks ago that that was actually Mitsurugi Ryzeal. That if Maliss got hit as hard as it did, that Mitsurugi Ryzeal would be the best deck in the meta. But, well, for one, I'll say this much. I think that when it comes to the best deck in the meta, just like last time, the difference between all of these different, like, tier 1 decks is very, very small. Even if one, I think, is slightly better than the other, it's not going to be by very much at all. They're pretty much the same power level. But I do actually think that Orcust tends to be a little bit better than Ryzeal, which I wasn't really expecting to say, but Orcust just has so much layers to what it can do, right? Both in terms of how it combos and what its end board looks like. And it's got so many starters that also act as extenders. It's really hard to brick in Orcust because even if you open cards you would normally want to send to the graveyard, you can just do that with Galatea Eye anyway, which is incredibly easy to summon even if you open something like Harpora or Symbol Skeleton. There's the fact that it can play so many additional engines without really any cost at all, and you could even play, like, mix the engines that you typically see separately, right? Like, I think I have, where's Mitsurugi Orcust? Here it is. Yeah, I have Mitsurugi Orcust and Fiendsmith Orcust as separate decks for the purpose of this tier list. But honestly, I feel like I've seen a lot of builds of Orcust that are playing both Fiendsmith and Mitsurugi, and that might actually be the strongest way to do it. Either way, I think I'm going to put Orcust towards the top of the tier list. I think Orcust variants are actually potentially the strongest deck you could play in Master Duel right now. I feel that even a little more so with Ryzeal. Ryzeal also had those limits lately. Yeah, recently, right? So I don't know why I hesitated. Like, oh, I thought that was like a couple of months ago. No, that was very recently. So the other thing too about that is that Orcust is a lot more consistent in that regard. Even if you have more starters, there's again the fact that Orcust can just have better hands in general based on the way that it plays. So long story short, I think Orcust is actually just the best deck of the current format. White Forest. I have Diabellstar of Vengeance representing White Forest here to sort of, you know, reflect all of the new support as well. I think that White Forest is very strong. I think that both Pure and Fiendsmith builds have a lot of viability. I think they're both going to be upper tier 2 for me. Yeah, I'm going to put them both in upper tier 2. I think really for me what the main difference is just how easily certain decks can play through certain hand traps, right? Like Orcust, with strength I didn't even really touch on is the fact that it's more or less immune to Droll. I think the Fiendsmith build is slightly better for its like basically immunity to Droll. And it plays a little bit better through other things like Nibiru than something like maybe White Forest, right? White Forest can often get stopped pretty easily by a Nib or a Droll. Again, I think that's for me in this meta, what's separating a lot of these decks in the different tiers is their ability to push through disruption and hand traps. White Forest is a really good deck, and I think I am going to leave it towards the top of tier 2, but I think it is a tier 2 deck. Same with Labyrinth, much like Branded is just a permanent resident of tier 2. I don't think the new Trapaholic really buffs it any, but it's still seeing a lot of play. Centurion, I think, is definitely a tier 3 deck. Might even put it a little higher than Gem Knights, mostly because there's so many different ways that you can play Centurion. Nah, I'll leave it a little bit lower. There's so many different ways you can play it, though. Between Magistus, between Mitsurugi, between Super Heavy Samurai. There's a ton of different stuff you can do. Bestials, there's so many different levels of Bestial packages you can have. I think that flexibility is a lot of what keeps Centurion out of Rogue, and why you see it so much more often compared to other. Like, if I'm just evaluating pure Centurion and nothing else, I think that's a Rogue deck, but the flexibility to play with all these other engines definitely makes it definitely better. Alright, tier limits. I'm actually going to put this towards the bottom of tier 2. Because tier limits have been able to pick up so many engines. I mean, throughout not just recent months, but even, you know, its entire lifetime. Most notably, of course, lately is Gem Knights. And when I think about Gem Knight tier limits in particular, I think that, yeah, that's like tier 2, but maybe more towards the bottom. Maybe a little bit better than, like, Lab. Yeah, that looks about right. Now, I was kind of wondering if Sky Striker would maintain its tier 2 status as the weeks went on, and the hype for the new support kind of, not by a ton, but a little bit died down. And I actually think that the answer is yes. I think that Sky Striker is honestly maybe even a little bit better of a control deck than Labyrinth right now. It's close either way, but yeah, I think that the Sky Striker support was more than just hype. I think it has actually panned out very, very well for the deck. Stun, I will continue to put in Rogue as it continues to suffer more and more hits, and overall just has the same strengths and weaknesses it always has. Going first, you can often just lock your opponent out of the game, but not only is going second a massive uphill battle, even more so than other decks, but there are a lot of times where your opponent will just have outs for you even if you go first as well. And especially the Morganite stun builds, losing out Christia is one of the things that they like to summon off the, you know, one that says you don't have to tribute. But I think those tend to be the weaker way to play stun anyway. Regardless, I definitely think stun is pretty firmly in the Rogue category. So Lunalight, honestly, I think even more than Sky Striker, I have actually been seeing the hype on this deck die down a little bit. I know when it first came out, everyone was terrified of the prospect of double Liger Dancer, and I still see people playing specific cards in their main and or extra to out the Liger Dancer. But, I mean, really, if you think about it, the double Liger Dancer, like, if it resolves, yeah, it's harder to get rid of than certain other decks' end boards, but is your lose rate against Lunalight when they drop the Liger Dancers really that much greater than your lose rate against other decks when they get their combo online? And when you think about it in that regard, you know, the Lunalight deck really isn't putting up nearly as many disruptions as a lot of other meta decks. It is mostly just kind of relying on how difficult it is to out the Liger Dancers. It's one of those decks that is, you know, if it kind of taps itself in a way, because if Lunalight were to start getting more and more popular and see more and more play, then people start putting in more kaiju type effects or other things to out Liger Dancer, and then the win rate starts to go down, and then people can take out their kaijus because Lunalight's not as much of a threat anymore. I was gonna say, it kind of reminds me of Gimmick Puppet in that regard, especially when it first came out. Gimmick Puppet was really, you know, scared. Like, people were really scared of Gimmick Puppet as this FTK deck, but then realized that you can just main deck DD Crow and have an out to Gimmick Puppet. So now Gimmick Puppet's sort of caught in this loop where if it ever starts to gain traction, people can just main deck this out to it, and then it's not nearly as good. And to a lesser extent, the same is true of Lunalight. Lunalight, I think, is way better than Gimmick Puppet, but I think Lunalight is still a very solid tier 2 deck. I'm going to put it, like, somewhere in this neighborhood. I had it at the top of tier 2 last tier list, and I think I'm going to have it more towards the middle. I think that even Branded, I say even Branded as if Branded is like such a weak deck, but I think a deck like Branded and White Forest is putting up currently at this moment more consistent results as far as like doing well than Lunalight. Lunalight also is going to hugely suffer in best of 3 and tournament formats. Naturally, because of side decking, the issue that, you know, if it gets popular, people can just play kaijus is even way more prominent there than it even is in best of 1 ranked player. Okay, Onomot Ryziel, I'm going to put up here in tier 1 next to Mitsurugi Ryziel. You could make an argument for Onomot Ryziel being even better, but I think these decks are pretty equal power level. Onomot Ryziel, I think, tends to be a little bit better in best of 3 tournament play, because the floodgates, like Protos and the Barrier Statue and the Feather Storm, I think those tend to be better in best of 3, where you're more likely to get them off. In best of 1, I think Onomot Ryziel is still really, really good. You just don't play it with the floodgates. And I think in best of 1 ranked ladder, overall Mitsu Ryziel is probably going to be just a little bit better. But definitely still a tier 1 deck. Again, although I think Orcust is a little bit better than Ryziel, Ryziel is definitely still very strong in this meta. Monarch is still seeing a fair amount of play. I haven't really encountered it personally on ladder. But from what I can tell from stats, yeah, Monarch is still seeing a fair amount of play out there. I've seen actually this fun variant of Monarch where they use 7th Tachyon to search Mega Zaborg as a means of, you know, sending a bunch of cards from the opponent's extra deck to the graveyard. And then you can even use the Dragalong in order to search the 7th Tachyon to search your Mega Zaborg. It's neat. It's cute. Well, I think it's Dragalong searching the Tachyon Primal, which specials grab 7th Tachyon, then you can summon Mega Zaborg by attributing those two. Anyway. Monarch is definitely still a rogue deck, though, for sure. It's probably going to be the lowest on this tier list here in particular. But definitely still a solid deck in its own right. Okay, Fiendsmith Gem Knight. Now, this variant is the one that kind of got Christia banned. I know I talked about it being used in Morganite Stun, but it really was Fiendsmith Gem Knight summoning the Christia off the Abao Aku that caused it to see a lot of play, and as a result, probably caused it to finally get banned. I think this deck is still really good, though. And I'm going to put it in tier 2. I think even a little bit above Lunalight. Because, for one, not every variant that was doing well was even on the Christia. Christia was kind of like an optional floodgate option. A good one, but optional nonetheless. And also, if I remember right, somebody pointed out that you could still use the light barrier statue if you really wanted to, instead of Christia, although, of course, it's not nearly as good, because mainly Fiendsmith, right? But all in all, I think that, yeah, Fiendsmith Gem Knight is still a very good deck in meta, and I'll put it in tier 2. Even, like, upper tier 2. Maybe even, I think it's pretty, I'll put it a little bit above Branded. I'm fine with that, yeah. Okay, Pure Mitsurugi is definitely a tier 1 deck. Again, I think that all these tier 1 decks are really, really close to each other, but I'll put it a little bit below Ryziel. Obviously, Mitsu's big weakness in this meta is that Droll and Mockbird is seeing more play. Because it got semi-limited, it's easier to slot those two Droll and Mockbirds into your deck, and Droll is pretty good against Mitsurugi. It doesn't completely shut it out all the time, but it does stop it from doing a lot of its stuff. But I think it's still a really solid tier 1 deck. Dragon Maid, I think, is still rogue. I think it's actually pretty comparable to Yubel. Part of me almost wants to put it above Yubel. That's what I was thinking about for a second there. But no, I'll leave it like this, yeah. I think Dragon Maid is still really, really good in this meta. Okay, Fiendsmith Control. This deck is always so difficult to place on a tier list. It really is. Well, no, it's not down there. It's, yeah, somewhere in the, yeah, that feels right. Between Tearlaments and Sky Striker, that feels right. It's weird, because Fiendsmith Control is, it varies so much build to build, player to player, even game to game. Like, how well it's equipped and how well it can do, right? But I think that flexibility is what's kept it so relevant for so long. Alright, Mathmech. I'll put Mathmech in tier 3. I'll put Blue Eyes in tier 2. Probably like somewhere in this neighborhood. Yeah, that looks good. Fiendsmith Mitsurugi, I'm going to put above pure Mitsurugi. I think having the option to pivot into Fiendsmith and having plays through the Droll and Lockroad is crucial. I really do. Now, again, I say it's crucial, but at the same time, pure Mitsurugi I do think is still a tier 1 deck. But for me personally, if I'm playing Mitsurugi, I think having Fiendsmith is crucial. That said, when it comes to this tier or style of Mitsurugi deck, as opposed to decks that use Mitsurugi as an engine, the pure build tends to be more popular. That said, I think the Fiendsmith variant is still a little more strong. And then Tenpai, I'm going to put down here in tier 3, next to Gym Knight. I think as going second OTK decks, these two are fairly comparable. So there we have it. There is my tier list going into the December 5th ban list. Now, again, as mentioned, we don't officially know what the new pack is going to have, or really at the time of recording this on November 29th, when it's going to drop. So, this is all of the stuff that's currently in Master Duel, factoring in the new ban list. But let me know what you think in the comments below as far as the strength of all these decks and the placement on the tier list. I'm eager to see in particular what people think about Maliss. I think upper tier 3 feels like a good spot for me right now, but what do you think? Again, let me know in the comments below. Anyway, that'll do it for now. This is Hexlex. I am signing out, but before I do, let's move on to our outro so we can thank our YouTube members and patrons. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.